All right. So, welcome everyone to tonight's event. My name is Demi, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this author talk. We have JP here from the Kamloops Society of the Written Arts, and we have guest author Anne Wheeler here with us tonight. So before we get started, I just want to remind you, if you are joining us on Zoom, your mic and video will stay off for the duration of the program. If you miss the program when we are live, you can catch it on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel after the fact. And also, if you're watching it live and you have any questions, you can put those into either the comments on Facebook or into the chat on Zoom. So without further ado, I will pass things off to JP.
Thank you so much, Demi. And thanks to the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library System, whom we partner with, the Kamloops Society for the Written Arts, on events like this. We like to call this Cool Authors Talking About Cool Ideas. And we have someone today who I think exemplifies that very, very well. It's a huge honor, actually, to have Anne Wheeler here with us today. I do want to just take a moment to acknowledge that your hosts here are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Secwepemc people here in Secwepemcúlecw, and it's an honor to live and work and play here, as well as love and create. So Anne Wheeler, for those who may not be familiar with the name, you're probably familiar with her work. She's done movies that many people have seen: Bye Bye Blues, The Diviners, Better Than Chocolate. Well-known director, writer, producer, worked on a lot of television. Has seen an Anne Wheeler written or produced piece of film or television. She's won the Order of Canada. She was the first woman to receive the Directors Guild of Canada's Lifetime Achievement Award. And she's done many, many other amazing things too. If you read her story, you will find that she's quite a trailblazer in many ways. So it's a huge honor for me to have you here with us and to present you and your new book, Taken by the Muse, which is fascinating. So I'd like everyone to welcome Anne in their virtual applause, whatever that looks like. Or in the privacy of your own living room, you can clap for each other. And I'll hand it over to you, Anne.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming this evening. And it's a new world for me to be doing this on Zoom, but it's always a pleasure to bring my stories to the people that I hope will find something in this book. This book has got something pretty much for everybody. It's a group of short stories, all of them stand alone. And I've, spent my life telling stories. These are stories that have never been put onto film. I don't think ever will be put onto film. So I thought they were stories I wanted to save. And I love the telling of them. I do a lot of story slams. So they were kind of developed by telling them to people, seeing what connected to people, what they got from them, how they learned from them. And I'm just going to read from the beginning, which is actually the introduction. Which is it's a different kind of introduction, but it's what I thought about when I sat down to write this book. I thought, who's been my muse? I've had many muses. Sometimes they're not people, sometimes they're places, sometimes they're events. But this is the introduction, and it takes place in Edmonton, December 1986. And it starts: I woke up in the middle of the night with a sense of urgency, and a song my mother often played ringing in my head. Don't send me posies when it's shoesies that I need. Knowing sleep would be impossible, I pulled on my parka, stepped into my winter boots, and trudged across the backyard through the deep snow to my writing shack. The door was iced up, so it took a good strong yank to break it open. It had been weeks since I'd written anything. With 2 young sons to raise and a small film company to run, it had been hard to get beyond the practical tasks of each day. I needed these times of silence, of aloneness. I needed the mental space to be creative. Tonight, perhaps the magic would spill out of me. I turned on my spanking new Columbia computer and opened it up to the files of Bye Bye Blues. It seemed like I had been grinding away for years on this epic screenplay, inspired by my mother's wartime years. I'd already written 6 or 8 drafts, maybe more. I could have lost count. They were all so mediocre, just scratching the surface and revealing nothing of substance. There I was, starting all over again at 2 a.m., shivering in the dim light, staring at the computer screen as it flickered into life. Come on, baby, I said. I know it's cold out here, but let's give it one last try. Suddenly the phone rang. Well, who on earth could that be? Thinking it had been the wrong number, I answered it with a hello, ready to cut the caller off quickly. There was a slight pause at the other end and a smoky voice. Is this Ann Wheeler? Could not replace the voice. It could be anybody. My name was in the phone book. My number is no secret. At this hour, it had to be the wrong number or somebody weird. Yes, it is, I said flatly, offering no encouragement. Who is this? I'm sorry, did I wake you up? Well, not exactly, but who are you? It's an odd hour to be calling. Well, it's Margaret Lawrence. Oh my God, I blurted. I didn't think I'd ever hear from you again. Margaret Lawrence was my all-time favorite writer and literary giant. She has 3 times won the Governor General's Award, and anyone who's taken high school English in Canada has studied her work. 2 weeks ago, I had the privilege, 2 years ago, I had the privilege adapting one of her short stories to film, To Set Our House in Order. It was a semi-autobiographical piece, and it was told in the first person by Vanessa McLeod, who, like Margaret, grew up in a small prairie town and eventually left to become a writer. I accepted the assignment to write and direct this film with trepidation. I mean, how could I live up to Margaret's genius and reputation, especially when I knew the book was primarily about her? And this was a particularly difficult story to adapt. It traces the inner thoughts of Vanessa at the age of 10, when she and her family moved into her paternal grandmother's home. Miserably, she witnessed how Hewan, her father, a doctor whom she'd always idolized, was repeatedly humiliated by his own mother. With time, she learns that her father, as a young man, went off to war with his younger brother, but came back alone. His mother always blamed him for the loss. There was nothing he could do to win her forgiveness. I didn't want to use a narrative voiceover, which I could have lifted from the book. Instead, I wanted to create some situations that would illuminate the girl's insights. I asked the producers if I could please talk to Miss Lawrence so that I could share my ideas with her before I began to write. They reported back that she did not want to talk to me, that I should go on and do my job. Well, this was an unsettling response. After struggling through so many drafts and fraught with self-doubt, I submitted the script to the producers with my innovations. Again, I asked if I could talk to the author once she'd read my screenplay. I'd taken considerable license and wanted to be sure that it did not trouble her. I wanted to get it right. I wanted her approval. But again, she was absolutely clear. She had no desire to read the script. She didn't want to see the work in progress. She wanted to see the film once it was finished. So I had no choice. We shot the film that I had written. The little movie was finished with great care, and a VHS tape was sent off to Ms. Lawrence immediately. There was no response. I thought perhaps she would watch it when it aired on CBC television and send me a message, any message, good or bad. The reviews were complimentary, the audience substantial, and even though it was a short film, it garnered a few awards. But I never heard from her. Until now. Here she is on the phone. More than a year since we sent her the package. I'm choked and can hardly think of what to say. Well, it's good to hear from you. Yes, well, one of the producers gave me this phone number some time ago now. I'm glad it's still yours. So what time is it there? Well, it's 2 something, but no problem. I'm up writing, kind of, trying. My kids and my husband are all sleeping. Well, good for you. How many kids do you have? 2 boys, twins. Well, isn't that expedient of you? Her chuckle is low and friendly. Yes, I got lucky, I guess. It's after 4 a.m. your time, isn't it? Yes, I don't sleep much. Oh, well, we have that in common. I'm a night owl for sure. There's a pause and I'm ready for anything. If she didn't like it, I'll take it like a big girl and absorb the disappointment. And maybe I'll learn something. So I don't watch much TV, she confesses. Actually, I don't have one, and I don't have a video player either, but a friend brought one over last night and we watched the movie together. Oh, good. I managed to squeak out. My throat has gone dry. Well, I loved it. I thought it was so good. Oh, you did? Oh, wow. I think I'm going to cry. Yes, I couldn't imagine what you would reveal, how you would reveal the moment, the revelation, that takes place inside her head. There's so much not to see physically in the book, but You created a perfect situation. It moved me to tears. Oh my God, I'm so relieved. I veered so far from what you wrote in order to say what I believed you were saying. Well, that's it. That's why I loved it. You understand, you understood my intentions. You said it through images and the performances. You didn't need a damn voiceover telling the audience what Vanessa was thinking and feeling. When she goes looking for her father and finds him alone, weeping like a child, and then she puts her arms around him like a mother, well, that really, really undid me. It said it all. Well, I don't know what to say, I blurted. The actors were terrific, weren't they? Yes, they were perfect. I knew them all. I did know them all. I was so relieved. I wanted to phone and tell you. Well, thank you so much, I say. I sit for a moment and absorb the affirmation. How many times had I beaten myself up thinking I had upheld the integrity of her work? I hear a familiar tinkle of sound. A glass, perhaps. It nudges me. Are you drinking scotch right now? I venture. Yes, in fact, I have a single malt open right here, just about to pour myself another. Would you mind if I run into my house and get mine? I think we should have a drink together. She laughs. That's a damn good idea. Go get it. So that's the little piece I decided I would read for you, because I always thought of Margaret as being a great inspiration. And she taught me more in that night. That conversation we had over scotch is probably, that was the first and most important lesson in writing I ever had, and it stuck with me. And so when I thought of myself as someone who would start by writing short stories, much like she did, except 50 years older than she was when she started, that I would review that conversation in my head and remember what she told me then. And so I thought back in my history and my journey to becoming a storyteller, and I kind of decided that if you haven't done a lot in your life and you haven't had some adventures to talk about, then it's hard to find the stories you're going to tell. And luckily, I was very lucky that I grew up in a family that had a number of storytellers, and I was encouraged to travel. So by the time I was in my mid-20s, I'd gone around the world 3 times. And I very much was attached to the place I grew up, which was Western Canada. And when I came back from my travels, I ended up bumping into a group of guys, all guys, that I'd gone to university with. And they were trying to make 16mm films. And so I kind of snuck my way into their midst. And first of all, I was an on-camera interviewer, and as fast as possible, I got behind the camera and started to use the camera as a tool, a storytelling tool, a tool with a purpose. And I guess that's been my mantra. If you're going to be a filmmaker, you have to have a purpose. And maybe I'll leave it there and see if anyone has any questions or comments they'd like me to speak to. I can't see any faces, which is very odd. Can I see faces? I can't hear you either, JP.
I know. You'd think it was my first time on Zoom. It's not.
Yeah.
Really. I turned my video off just so that I wouldn't distract from you. And I think everybody's here for you, not for me. But I'll turn it on because I do have a question. I'm really glad that you read from the introduction, because I think it's really interesting, especially from the writer's perspective, because you start your book with the story about writing. But you do talk about being fraught with self-doubt. So I'm very curious, and I think it's a very, it's not just writers, but all creatives deal with self-doubt on a regular and recurring basis. So, and I know that you work with young people as well. So I'd love to know, what are the strategies, or what do you tell people who are fraught with self-doubt?
Well, I think we are always fraught with self-doubt, and I think actors are always fraught with stage fright, and everybody that's creative. I mean, it's a risky business, and I still, if I don't do production, which means going onto the floor and having 150 people look at me and tell me what I want, or I tell them what I want, and try to be specific and creative and decisive. If I don't do that for a while, if it's like 6 months between films or something like that, I don't know what it is, sort of like a stage fright. So I think on all levels of creativity, whether you're a painter or a writer or an actor, there's always the self-doubt. And I always go back to, again, the sense of purpose as to why I'm doing what I'm doing. Why am I writing what I'm writing? And it often leads me back to that I'm not doing it to please other people or to be judged by other people. I really have a reason to be writing it. All of the pieces in the book, for instance, are all stories that take me to a place where I learn something very important, something that I use every day and that I want to pass on. And if I don't pass it on, it won't go anywhere. That story will die. So I always try to tell stories that have never been told before, and then I feel like I'm a bit of a parent to them. But it always comes back to that intention, that Margaret Lawrence talks about, that she didn't care if I didn't do exactly what her story said, that she cared that I knew what she was intending to say, what she was trying to say. So I keep going back to that when I'm writing. I'll read it out loud. I'll read it to somebody. I find that orally sharing stories is very useful to me. But I can tell if people understand or are confused or bored or more curious. I don't know how to answer it any further than I think a lot of people go into the arts, writing or art or whatever, thinking that they're just going to sit down and do it. It's actually nerve-wracking, and like I probably did write 32 drafts of Bye Bye Blues, and every time I finished, I would be full of self-doubt, going, it's not good enough. I'll have to go back at it, and probably the day that I did the scenes, I was not completely satisfied with what I'd done. So I think it's a state of being, and one just has to get used to being in that state of being. It's part of the creative process.
Sure, that's interesting. I have another question, but I do want to just take a moment and encourage people, if you have questions for Anne, please put them in the chat if you're on Zoom. If you're watching us through Facebook Live, please feel free to put them in the comments there, and Demi will throw them in the chat for us. So another question I have for you, Anne. You described sitting in your writer's shack, and I'm very envious of anyone who has a writer's shack, no matter how cold it is inside. The writing work of filmmaking is a very solitary enterprise, but the directing and filmmaking part is involves a lot of different people and a lot of moving human parts. How do you do that? How do you go from one to the other?
Well, it's an art form that is always changing. I mean, it used to be that there was one writer, one director, and one producer, and that was your key team to begin with. You found the story you wanted to tell, you wrote it up, you found someone who might be able to write it, to produce it, raise the money for it. And I was lucky to be a writer director, but I've directed lots of other people's scripts, of course. I think that now, of course, writing for television is not an insular thing. It's there's writing rooms, and sometimes there's 12 and 15 writers that are banging out a story and what should happen. And then as a writer, you can be given, that episode that you didn't really think that you were going to be writing, but you could be given that, and you might do a draft of it, and the next time somebody else in that writing room might do a draft of it. So there's that does happen. That does happen in quite a few episodic television situations. But I think I need both. I'm a very eclectic person, so I like to have that time to think. And it certainly makes my job as a director easier because I, start out by seeing the story through other people's eyes, because I've written those people and created, their journeys from the inside out, hopefully. And then when I'm on set, one of the stories is called The Devil and the Divine, which is about my meeting with Rajneesh, who now more people know about him because of the Wild Wild West series that
Right.
was done about him. But I was with him before that series, the time period that that series covers. Before that all happened, I never went to the States or was involved with the American journey with him. But it's I think when I direct now, it's sort of my own approach to it is like a parent, really. Like it used to be that the director was the general of the army, kind of barking out the rules and very, very authoritative. And I'm more of the kind of the mother type that tries to see that everybody does their best, but that it's all one thing, and everybody needs something different. So I'm a very one-on-one director. Like I don't call my directions out to actors out loud. I go up to them, have eye-to-eye contact, speak with them very directly, and so that it's a very intimate exchange. So that didn't used to be, a way of directing, but I find it way more effective.
Mhm.
And there are times when I talk to the whole group, and I explain to them that when we do the perfect take, and I like to do a lot of scenes in one shot if possible. It's becoming more difficult with so many people wanting different things from the footage, but that we'll all know it was the best take, because it's sort of a collective. It's like when the golfer hits the ball perfectly. It's like a meditation. And we all kind of know we're in the moment, and we just did our best, and it all worked like we dreamed it would work. So it's not so public. It's actually quite an intimate
Mm.
process, I find directing to be, especially when I'm on a long shoot. We all become like family, and it's very nurturing, and you learn a lot about yourself and the other people, and you become a one unit.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. We have a question coming in from Claire here, actually, if I can read this to you. Claire says, there are a lot of lessons in Taken by the Muse, with each piece showing a point in your life where you gained a skill or clarity that seems to have helped you later. Is there one lesson that is helping you during the pandemic?
um well, gosh, in pandemic, well, I mean, certainly some of my stories, being in the pandemic for me as a storyteller hasn't had a huge impact, but it certainly has given me the time to go through reams of box and things I've collected and pulled out the stories that I think will not be told unless I tell them. I'm getting of an age where I kind of go, well, I'm not going to be here forever. So it's certainly uh, taught me how to prioritize. And as the last story in my book is with Augusta, who was a shoe shop woman and was the storyteller of her nation. Everybody that was connected to her referred to her as our storyteller. She was very, very clear about that role as being an ancient and important role. As she said, if people hadn't made those drawings on the side of the cave, we would have known so much less of who they were if they hadn't left some of their stories behind. So I think I hear her voice in my head as I'm going through these letters and people sending me their diaries and pictures and albums and reminiscences, to choose the ones that are important stories, and to feel that they're kind of sacred, actually, because that's our writing on the cave wall as to who we are here and now. And we have a responsibility as storytellers, because it doesn't matter if you're a filmmaker or do radio or write books or tell stories around the fire. It's I think our responsibility, our role to choose what it is that will be remembered.
Super, thank you. We have another question coming in here from Wendy. So Wendy says, having not read the book, can you highlight some of the lessons you write about or that you learned through writing the book? So you mentioned each each story is sort of around, there's a lesson learned. So
Well,
you took
yes,
us
and
on
I
a
think
quick
a lot of
tour.
people, a lot of people read the book and they don't, they just read it because, there are some fairly funny situations I get myself into. I started in Africa, and like my generation, I imagined that I would be getting married in my early 20s and have children and have someone who would provide a living for me. But I start in Africa. Basically, I'm, in my early 20s and I'm about to get married and I decide that I'm making a huge mistake. So I actually, on the way to the church, decide that I'm not getting married, which was not a very popular decision, but it was one that, overwhelmed me. So, I learned to be aware of my instincts. I think it was the right decision. And then all of a sudden I had like a completely blank future. And so, I think a lot of people don't go through that period of life where they actually seriously wonder about how they want to live their life, what they're going to do with the years that they have. So that story really took me into a village, and I learned a lot from the people in the village that night, and kind of just going back in time and realizing that maybe my role was, to be a storyteller, and that it always taught me a lot about prejudices and seeing the world through other people's eyes. And then I come home and I end up trying to get into a film co-op. So it's a story of really taking risks and making a commitment and wanting it enough that you're going to give up something. It's important enough for you to give other things up. And then we got to be quite a successful little company. And we went from doing very political films on issues that we felt strongly about to being, offered fair amounts of money to do other kinds of films because we were getting good at what we did at putting it together to tell a story, or the camera work, the editing, everything became very, very smooth and professional. And so I think we started making films that we actually didn't actually choose because of what they said. We knew we needed money to buy equipment, and so we became maybe not so selective. And I found that my passion started to wane. And then I went and I made a film. I looked back in my own family history and realized that the women in my family hadn't really been documented, and then there was an enormous wealth of stories that had never been told. So I did a lot of it was like a treasure trove. So it was very inspiring to go back into my own family history and mine that gold of stories. And then I took a break and I went off, and I think I felt kind of caught up in the madness of filmmaking, and wanted to maybe center myself. I went to India and took a moment to really reassess and changed really a lot of things about myself, very subtle things. But I came back with not trying to do what guys did is better than what the guys did, but actually really finding a personal approach to my work, not being competitive, doing it for the love of it. And that led me eventually to do this little short film on Augusta, she was the real deal. She was the real deal. I mean, I think if I was to say who was my greatest mentor, Margaret certainly was wonderful that one night, but and she passed a lot along to me that one evening we had a drink together that I started the book up with. It, but the book is bookended with this other old woman who she had just a very broad, ancient perspective, and was really an enlightened being, and was so delighted that I'd taken her stories and put them on this mysterious ribbon that we could project on the wall. She just couldn't believe that her stories were going to live on beyond her years. And being with her was just really inspiring.
That's great. Another question for you. The title is taken by the Muse. Sounds like there's not necessarily a choice there. And you've talked about purpose and responsibility. Is it a choice what you do, or are you taken and are you called to this work?
Well, you know, I was brought up in a fairly conservative family, and not a lot of women before me actually had worked after being married, for sure, but there weren't a lot of career women in my family. But I was always told, as a lot of women my generation were told, to have something to fall back on. So you know, I got a science degree in mathematics, and computers were just beginning to appear. They were bigger than my bedroom, but I graduated in math, computing science, um, and uh, and so I was, you know, I was on a course to maybe like get married and or maybe have a very practical career that would give me a sense of security. But I'd always, as a kid, been a singer and a performer and a storyteller, and I loved to dance, and I was the, you know, lead in the year play. So there was always a part of me that loved to to be a performer, or to get inside the psychology of characters while acting in a play. So it was, you know, there was a natural instinct that told me that math was not really what I should be doing with my life. And then I became a high school teacher, and there was, you know, something there also that said I shouldn't, probably that wasn't where I was going to land. So you know, the stories really do take me to the crossroads where I kind of am reminded that it's my choice. You know, it's my life. I get to choose what I do. I don't necessarily need to get married to, you know, or you know, have the security that sometimes, you know, it gives you the motivation to take a job. It's there's always been somebody that's crossed paths and went, oh, no, 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 you know, you should be doing this. You should try this. Here's another challenge. Doesn't this excite you? And of course I'd say, yeah, that looks way more interesting, and I would you know, change my course.
Sure. I have another question here from Wendy. Wendy says, I grew up in a family where people were listeners more than talkers. I never learned to storytell. What do you think makes a good storyteller? Qualities, being able to manage the spotlight, how to believe that what I'm saying is worth telling and worth others listening?
Well, I think everybody, you know, I think that the whole art of telling stories is being lost. I mean, in my family growing up, we usually were having a game of rummy or something around the table, and it would just be people jawing back and forth on what was, you know, what was happening in their lives. But I think, you know, you don't have to be a storyteller. You don't have to be someone who performs it. You can be someone who writes it, you know, or tells it in photographs, or paints it, or, you know, documents something that's happening in their lives that will be remembered through your actions. So I don't think people need to think that they have to be good storytellers, but I'm sure that if you look in your background, start there. Like I must say, when I look back into my grandmother, and then the women who pioneered the prairies, and you know, survived not only the weather, but just being alone or having many children. We didn't really know what they thought about anything, but if you look into your own history, usually I think you can find stories that are worth writing down, and then in your own quiet time, you go through them and you keep polishing them and polishing them. You have all the time in the world to make them interesting and multifaceted. And so, you know, I think everybody can do that within their own families. I think it's important for families to keep their own stories alive.
Was there part of the book, in terms of storytelling, was there part of the book that was particularly fun for you to write?
Well, you see, I mean, most of them, as I say, I do story slams. So I go to a little town in Mexico where we have a kind of an ongoing thing. I've been going down there for 15 years, and they're called story slams. And so you go and you throw your name in the hat, and 12 of you get chosen, and you have to get up and tell a story in 5 minutes. And so I think that's the fun thing, is to try to boil a story down to 5 minutes, but to see the reactions, to see what is funny, what is meaningful, to talk to people after you've told those stories, see what they got from it. I think the whole process is really inspiring. It really provokes a lot of thought, and I'm lucky that I have that kind of personality that can get out and do that. But just to listen to the other people's stories, I mean, it's actually a great thing just to do at any gathering, that everybody has to tell a story under 5 minutes. You know, you're not going to get boring in 5 minutes. So I think the actual telling of stories, and the telling of all those stories, like the first time I went out with a camera to shoot, I mean, I tell that when I'm driving around with a crew and we're in a bus looking for a location and getting sick and tired of being locked up in a van together. I'll tell a story and see if it works, and that's the real fun part.
Yeah, I know that David Sedaris, if you've ever seen him read live, he's taking notes on how things go over with the audience when he's reading.
Oh yeah.
So he's reading drafts and he's taking notes on where.
Yeah, well,
things are.
that's the best way. If you get a chuckle, or you have this, people doze off, that maybe you've bored them to death.
Right. You've accomplished a lot in your life, Anne. Is there something what are you most proud of? And it's hard to single one thing out, but what makes you most proud in all the things that you've accomplished?
Well, I don't know about proud. I mean, I feel grateful that I've been able to go on the journey I've gone on. And I mean, I think there's a lot of when you're in the business I'm in, there's a lot of hurdles just on a personal level. I mean, it's really hard to keep control of your ego, I think. People get a bit puffed up if they have success, and they start to feel that they're superior to others. And a lot of film shoots, some of them have been wonderful, but some of them attract people who are really difficult to work with, because they're maybe trying to have the power or be controlling or whatever. But to kind of come out and still at the end of the journey, and in general, I think people are basically wonderful. And I've got lots of warm, fuzzy memories of working with people, and I have not come out angry or bitter or dissatisfied. I've feel like I've had a fairly normal life, having a family and friends and old friends in my life still, and I haven't come separated from that sort of continuum that people do sometimes get. They go off to Hollywood, we never see them again, we don't know what their lives become, and sometimes they're not that happy.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me, and you can tell me if this is not totally accurate, but you've done some fairly courageous things when you could have seen barriers to those things. I mean,
Could have what?
Becoming a filmmaker, where you could have seen barriers to certain paths in your life. You studied mathematics and computer science in the very early days.
Yeah.
I don't imagine that I imagine you faced a lot of surprise by that decision. You became a filmmaker. You mentioned, going and joining a group of guys to start making films, but you did it. So you've broken down some barriers. What do you see?
People keep saying, and it's true. I know I've, sometimes got hurt. I've broken my legs 8 times in my career, putting myself 5 of those times on sets where I'm not exactly an athletic type, but I'm trying to keep up with the guys, and I've fallen on ice and I've fallen off a train and I've had a bed fall on me and, things like that. They happen. But, I know I've gone into a world that's a very, very male dominated, but I tend to just kind of see them as my brothers rather than the opposition. I have 3 older brothers and I've got 3 sons. And so I've never seen them. I see that they do things different than me often. But for the most part, I have very close, dear friends that that have, I've worked with more men than women, obviously. So I've come out of the business with more male friends than female in terms of ones that go back many, many years. And there's been some, some guys and gals that have not been particularly my cup of tea, but I'm just honest with them and just try not to let them get under my skin. And I just focus on what I'm there to do. And like I say, try to keep your ego out of it. Your ego is going to help you survive, but just don't let things trigger your actions, keep trying to do it for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you grew up in Alberta. You've talked about Margaret Lawrence. And I know that we're in BC now, but if you scratch a lot of BC families, you find prairie roots you don't have to go too far to find prairie roots. Is it still something to you to be from the prairies? Does that still have an impact on your work or your mentality or anything?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I still call myself an Albertan living in BC, even though I've been here now for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think there's something that's in, I grew up with a horse and I could go out riding that horse, especially in the fall when the gates were down and the crops were in, and ride for miles and miles and miles and never see the over the lip of the horizon. I think in the big skies, that gives you a certain outlook. And just the freedom that I grew up with. I think that just stays with me. And yeah, I think, you can't leave your childhood. It's always your childhood. It always is what has formed you. And in both on both of my sides, my folks are from prairie stock, pioneer stock. So, which leads you not to complain, not to whine, just get on with it. Be practical, improvise if you have to, and keep going forward. So I'm sure that's those are lessons learned in every part of the world. But the people I learned from them were all prairie folk. So I'm still very connected to the prairies.
Yeah, wonderful. And I liked hearing just before we started this that you went to Edmonton to pick up boxes of books, and this is published by New West, and
Yeah.
so there's prairie connections to the publishing as well. So
yeah, how could I not go with a publisher that's got New West as a name? It's a great name, New West Press. Yeah. JP, you're frozen on me. I want to say hi to Corrine. Corrine, put your picture on.
there.
I see an old friend. It's actually her brother that I started making movies with. I see your name.
Yeah, I put it on. Hi. I put it on, but the host is taking me off.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. I'd rather look at faces than black names. Black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they took it off.
Corrine and I used to sing together, and we did theater together. So she's probably relating to.
I'm getting all this choppy. Hang on. It says my internet connect stable. So I didn't hear that. Go say it again.
Well, I just said you and I go back, and we sang and did theater together. So I'm sure you're still connected to the prairies too. We're prairie girls.
Yeah, absolutely. I liked what you said about that.
And yeah, and we don't want you to take the turning the video off the wrong way, but I think that the library is bound by certain privacy things.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they are. So
It's unmuting me. I mean, it's muting me too. There, I got myself on again, but it takes me off again. So if I disappear, it's not my choice there.
yeah,
Right.
no, it's not.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it was, it's so fabulous for me to have known you way back then, but then to read all those stories that bring you up, well, it's still early in the 70s, which was such a unique time, but pretty special to read those stories for me personally, anyway, because they're wonderful stories. And I really appreciate a lot about the strength of the women, I guess is what I'd say, that comes through in your stories. And how that was being, maybe you already had it, but it sure was, those stories that you have in there to me really speak to the beauty and the power and the strength of women that's not always known and seen.
Yeah. Well, I know I didn't know my grandmother very well, and long after she died, I came to realize that she lived next door, grew up next door to Nellie McClung. It had never been mentioned that she hung out with her, and that Nellie used to come down to my mother's farm and stay there for weeks, and they would cook and talk and share stories and such. And my mother just thought Nellie McClung was a troublemaker, because it seemed that her parents always had an argument after Nellie left, and I can imagine they did. but you know, Nellie McClung was considered not important at all. Like I said, I didn't find out she was. And my aunt left me a lovely painting thing for the wall from Nellie McClung. So yeah, they weren't taking that seriously, and people like Nellie, who were brilliant in many ways. I mean, they were also of the upper middle class and had certain prejudice that we don't share now, but we don't know very much about women's history. I think that great grandmother that comes out of the story in the book, there's a great grandmother's a film you can see on the National Film Board site. You know, there had never been a movie about women's history made in Canada up to then. So it was, and when we went to archives and museums across the country, there were no files. We had to find pictures of women under things like husbandry and growing tomatoes, and you know, but there was nothing under any female names or the work that they did, or the concerns that they held, the issues that they addressed. There wasn't one museum that had a file. So there is now, which is really great.
Yeah, and the fact that you wrote this, you're writing about things back in the 70s, which of course you're even referring to times before that, but it shows the history, it shows the development. So people that are reading it now can have a better understanding of what's been gained since then.
Yeah, I'm amazed when I look back at how much has changed, because it's been gradual in some cases, but.
And there's another question here from Wendy. Wendy's asking, how structured are you in terms of plot and structure, or are you more of an intuitive artist? So I imagine when you're writing, you have a plot structure in mind, you have things planned out, and or do you kind of go with the flow when you're doing the story?
Well, it's funny, you know, I kind of plot out my stories a little bit like a flow chart, like I used to do programming with computers. You know, I do a square, and this is where we start, and then an arrow to this, but from there's these kind of counter or little parallel arcs that are happening in the story. It's very loose. I certainly know what I'm going to try to say, and I usually know the last chord I want to hit. You know, if you try to tell a story in 5 minutes, it very quickly comes down to being, you know, you do all the weeding, and you just get down to the hard stuff. You know, that's the best way that I find that to structure, just to try to get it down to 2 pages to begin with, and then start stretching it out again. You kind of see your structure starts to take shape. I'm so used to formulas. My husband gets annoyed at me because I can tell when I'm watching a television episodic, they're mostly all they're all following a formula. The boxes, they always find what they are looking for on the third try. I'll be able to predict, I can see the setup in the first act for what's going to happen in the last act. So I think that the formula thing is good when you're in the marketing, in the world of, of television, and you kind of working with a certain marketplace. But my stories, you'll find, they meander a bit, but they always come to a conclusion. There's always a crescendo. I think of it actually as more of a piece of music in a way. It often starts soft and builds and gets full, and then I know where I'm going, but I don't like to get too much in my head. And I'll often find that something that spins out, I just comes to mind, I'll spin out, I'll just go with it, because like I say, it's all about rewriting. My first draft might be 4 or 5 times longer than eventually the story ends up being. So it's like shooting a documentary film. I go out and I shoot it, and then I start to edit it down to the essentials.
I've got another question here from Corinne, which is, what is your next project of stories to tell? Is it another book? Is it a film?
Well, I've got 2 or 3 things on the go. I really very much want to tell a story of making a war story, which was about my father, who was a doctor in a prisoner of war camp, and I have his diary. And I did make a film about it in the 70s, but in the 70s there was no internet, the research was literally had to go to Japan and go to the museum and go to their warehouse. So there's so much more now, and so many stories have been sent to me, and so there's a book in that area, and also growing up with a father who was very quiet and of course didn't say much about what he'd seen and done. So there's a novel there which seems immense, so it keeps getting put off. And then I have boxes around my office. One is stories that have been given to me by people who say, if you don't do something with it, this story will be lost. It's an important story. So I'm reviewing those. And then there's stories that are collections of stories that one of them is just around music and how it has intercepted my life in many ways. So, I've got 5 or 6 boxes around here that are full of little collections, loose as they might be, for books of short stories. So I feel like, I've got lots of seeds to plant.
And is there something you can do? You mentioned a novel, you mentioned short stories. Are there things that are possible when you're writing short stories or novels that aren't necessarily possible when you're doing film? And I ask this in part because when you talked about Margaret Lawrence and interpreting the diviners, and how do you illustrate that interior voice, which is the wonderful thing about novels, is that we can see the interior characters, right? So is there something?
Well, writing after writing scripts is so liberating. I'm also writing a script right now, and you always have to keep the budget in mind. You have to kind of go, I got way too many big crowd scenes here. I've got way too many characters. I will never get the rights to this song. I can't use this song. So when you're writing a script, and also now when you write a script, it's going to be, it'll go past so many hurdles in terms of people who are going to distribute it, people who are going to finance it. Is there too many films out on this subject? It's just, you get into second guessing, which doesn't make for good writing. So I find it really liberating to be able to write stories that, I just sit with myself for, it doesn't come fast. It's a lot of work, but you consider it and you put it out, and it's yours. It's, and you can put crowds of thousands in there, not worry that it'll never be made because nobody will ever be able to afford to produce it.
You can have all the crowd scenes you want.
Yeah, you can go inside people's you know, veins that can tunnel through into their gut. Whatever, where you want to go, you can go with the word, but you can't go there with a camera.
Right. I've got another question here. I just want to remind people that we've only got about 5 minutes left. So if you do have a question, please put it in the Facebook chat or in the Zoom chat, and make sure we get it to Anne before we finish up. But you know, when I look, one of the things that I noticed on the cover of your book is that you got blurbed by Alice Walker.
Mm.
That's a pretty big deal, don't you think?
It was very, very kind of her. Very,
Yeah.
very kind of her. But she's part of my storytelling slamming group in Mexico.
Really?
Yeah. So if I can make Alice Walker laugh like Kafa, I feel, you know, triumphant. And we've become, you know, we put on an evening every year, or we have several years, to raise money for different things in our town. And she's a very generous, philosophical, wonderful person. And yeah, so she, you know, she likes my stories, and she knew I was writing a book, so she asked if she could read it, and offered to do a blurbs, which I accepted humbly. I had no idea it would be as generous as it was, but of course it's been an important quote to have on the front of one's book.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to encourage everybody to go out and buy your book, which I'm not sure. I know that the first run sold out. Is that right? First printing?
Yeah, I think there's more though. I think there's, you know, more on the way. Claire can talk to that. But I think we've got books now. There was a little period there where we had a bit of a slump, but now I think, you know, the warehouse is filling up again.
That's great. And what I will do too is, oh, Claire says the fourth printing yesterday. So that's
only released on the 15th of October. So I think that's pretty funny.
I think you're doing really well with it. And what I'm going to do is actually check at our local bookstore to make sure it's there, and send a message out following up to our mailing lists for all the local people in Kamloops and region to make sure they know that they can get a hold of it. And I encourage people to visit your website too, which is annwheeler.com.
Yeah, if they get a hold of me, I'll send them they can get a signed copy.
That's wonderful. That would be great.
Yeah.
Super. Yeah. Is there anything you want to leave people with in terms of your story, either the story of your life or the story of this book? You know, we have a lot of people in our region who write memoir, who read a lot of memoir, who are very inspired by people's stories, especially people who've had such varied and amazing experiences as you have. So is there anything you want to leave them with?
Well, I think as Augusta said to me, just be sure you tell the stories that nobody else will tell. So I think everybody has those stories. I don't think anybody would have told the stories I've told in the book. But yeah, I mean, I find it incredibly rewarding to write just for the sake of writing. It's, you know, it's like painting. And, you know, I'm in my mid-70s, so it's never too late to start a new career. I feel like I'm starting a new career.
That's amazing. Well, yeah. We're very fortunate to have you speak with us tonight and share the story, your story and the story of your book, and we'll encourage lots of people to buy it and to contact you to get it signed if they like to. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And to all those who are tuning in, as I said, this is all about cool authors talking about cool ideas. We've had Anne tonight. On November 22nd, we have Jan Sterling. November 26th, we have George Johnson. And December 10th, we have Eddie Generous. And we'll be sending out some information on those. And you can visit our website at kswa.ca or the TNR Library's website. So if everyone can, in the comfort of their own homes or Facebook land, give a warm round of applause for Anne. We wish you all the best with this book, Anne, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Take good care.
Thank you.
Thank you.